Everything broke apart for Leia when she was just 8 years old. It transpired on a Tuesday when it rained. She went from being a daughter to a mere memory keeper with the ring of a phone. After her parents passed away in a car crash, she felt alone and helpless in a world that seemed incomprehensibly large. In northern Oregon, she and her grandma Evelyn settled into a peaceful apartment nestled among rows of ancient maple trees. Evelyn tried her hardest. Before tucking Leia into bed, she made her favorite cookies, read her stories, and cradled her in her arms. No matter how secure we make a space, sadness can nonetheless find a way in. Leia was so silent. Her once vibrant laughter had faded away like smoke. Even though the flat was secure and peaceful, it reeked of echoes, and none of them were romantic. With the loss of friends and a husband to mourn, Evelyn had also raised a family. Grief, she knew, could be carried but not healed. However, something inside her broke every morning as she stared into Lila's vacant eyes. Too much stillness and silence had settled over the flat. As Evelyn sipped her tea and heard the rain patter on the kitchen window one morning, she made a decision. Someone who wouldn't try to fix her, but would simply be there for her that weekend. Someone who could sit quietly by her side without interjecting questions, was what Leia was looking for. On the slope, Evelyn brought Leia to the animal rescue. They were greeted by rows of excited dogs, each one yapping for attention. But there was a huge German shepherd, sitting patiently at the further end of the shelter. He had fur that was as black as a storm cloud. Though his ears were perceptive, there was a familiar warmth and knowledge in his gaze. Without uttering a word, Lila halted outside his kennel. She did nothing more than stoop down and meet his gaze. As he cautiously approached the bars, the dog cocked his head and poked his nose through. "What's his name?" "He has been through a lot, and doesn't warm up to just anyone," the attendant said Evelyn, in response to her question about rustiness. Leia, however, had her little fingers curled up between the bars and were stroking Rusty's fur. Nothing prompted him to back down. That afternoon, they returned him to his house. He remained perfectly still and composed throughout. While Leia read a book on the couch, he did nothing more than lie down by her feet. His breathing was regular and relaxed, as though he had always been there. Leia finally drifted off to sleep that night as her hand was softly on Rusty's back, something that had happened weeks earlier. Nothing was requested by Rusty. He was quite content not to whine or demand walks. He merely existed by Leia's side, an unassuming figure who was stable and tolerant. He used to wait patiently by the door first thing in the morning, his tail tapping gently on the floor. He would greet Leia at the door as soon as she got out of bed after school, his body trembling with an intensity he rarely displayed to anyone else. He used to cuddle up with her in the evenings, placing his head on her toes while she did her schoolwork. The walls surrounding Leia began to crumble. She was chatting with Rusty, who she was braiding his fur with her clumsy fingers, and she was whispering secrets into his ear. When he would sneak snacks out of the kitchen or dally around chasing his tail, she would chuckle softly. They enjoyed spending warm days sitting on the front stairs together. While Rusty leaned on Leia's knee as she read aloud to him, Evelyn observed from the window. A mixture of relief and bittersweetness squeezed her heart. The once empty apartment was beginning to fill with the sounds of life again. Rusty's occasional faint barking, the rustling of pages as they turned, and Leia's barefoot dancing on the floor. It was far from miraculous. Sadness remained a shadow over their lives. Leia used to weep into Rusty's fur before going to sleep, but now she had company. Rusty was more than a pet. He was an integral part of her existence, a silent guardian, and a symbol that something soft might emerge from the shattered pieces of her world. It was simple to explain away in the beginning. Lila started experiencing dull headaches that engulfed her temples like a fog. Some mornings she would stay in bed longer, her limbs' heaviness making her eyelids resistant to opening. Evelyn attributed Leia's decreased appetite to her chronic fatigue. which she attributed to her constant feelings of exhaustion. Lila's complexion became paler, and her once vibrant personality seemed to fade. Rusty, who used to spring into action whenever Lila reached for his leash, now rises slowly, almost reluctantly. He still follows her from room to room, but his once joyous tail now twitches occasionally. Evelyn noticed the change, but old habits die hard. "It's the weather," she whispered one chilly morning as she wrapped Leia in her scarf. "We usually feel lethargic when it rains, but there was something that didn't quite add up." Unfortunately, Leia's book slipped from her fingertips while she dozed off on the couch one afternoon. Evelyn worriedly observed as Rusty laid next to her, his breathing noticeably slower than normal. The two of them gradually became quieter, slower, and darker. Even though there was no obvious cause for concern, no fever, cough, or other symptoms, a pervasive feeling of something being amiss permeated the entire flat. Like sunlight slipping behind a storm cloud, Leia and Rusty appeared to gradually fade away as time passed. With nearly 15 years of experience in the classroom, Miss Alvarez was able to detect when something was amiss with her second-grade class. Whether it was due to math homework or a fight on the playground, she could always detect when a child's attention was wandering. Leia's quiet demeanor has been a consistent trait since she first enrolled in her class. However, she has recently become even more reclusive, dozing off during reading time with her head resting on her folded arms. She also hardly eats her lunch and appears to have lost some of her once neat and careful handwriting, which trails off mid-sentence. She gently asked Evelyn, "I don't mean to worry you, but I think Leia might be more than just tired. Has she been eating well? Sleeping okay?" Evelyn hesitated, saying, "I've been a little off lately. Headaches, mostly. I thought maybe it's just the time of year." Miss Alvarez paused and brought up Rusty, who had also been sick. This made Evelyn pause again. She had previously brushed off Rusty's exhaustion, similar to Leia's, but hearing it from someone who wasn't weighed down by grief had made it sink in like a stone, unshakable reality after the call. In the stillness of the night, Evelyn sat on the edge of the couch, her gaze fixed on the heater vent across the room. The familiar hum of the air moving through it had taken on a new quality that night. She was so exhausted that she went to bed at a reasonable hour. Even though it was her evening ritual, she failed to finish reading her book. Snuggling up at her feet, Rusty was there at midnight. After a little nap on her chair, Evelyn awoke. She wasn't roused from her slumber by the faint buzzing of the television, though. Rusty whined with a low, urgent tone. The sound prompted her to slowly rise and follow it down the corridor. By the time she reached Yayla's chamber, the whine had reduced to a barely perceptible bark. At the foot of the bed, Rusty sat with his teeth softly pulling at the blanket as his paws grazed the mattress. "Rusty," Evelyn said beneath her breath. Her gaze met the dog's big, anxious eyes as he turned to face her. His bark became more pointed as he turned his attention back to Leia and then to the vent close to the floor. It was at that moment that Evelyn saw Leia's pale complexion, slow breathing, and the fact that her little hand remained on Rusty's back. Standing motionless, she remained transfixed. Opening the windows, Evelyn felt a shiver go down her spine. Leia seemed to awaken from her watery slumber as she blinked slowly in response to her mother's repeated calls for her name. Not hot or smoky, but heavy and rusty. That was the air in the room. Attempts to yank her out by morning were more of a goal than a playful game of pulling the blanket. No more guesswork for Evelyn. A former heating technician and longtime friend of hers, Frank, was contacted by her. In his garage, he continued to fix machinery, and was always willing to lend a hand when anything wasn't quite right. "Come quick," she pleaded, her voice strained with concern. "Something's wrong in this apartment." In less than an hour, Frank had a toolbox at the ready. In the crisp early air, his breath could be seen. After giving Evelyn a brief nod in greeting, he proceeded to inspect the heating ducts, vents, and furnace in each room while holding a tiny portable sensor nearby. He came to a halt in front of Lila's room, and the sensor began to beep. It was soft at first, but soon became quite loud. "Evelyn, there's an issue with you," he whispered gently. For some reason, she felt sick to her stomach. "What kind of problem is it?" "Poisonous gas." Frank said that, although it was worse in some ways, the levels were low and stable. It was invisible to the naked eye and could infect anyone, even a young child or dog, with only a whiff. Evelyn was on the verge of collapsing. Silent killers include carbon monoxide. The symptoms, namely the headaches, became clear at that very moment. The exhaustion. Fits of fainting Leia. It was the air that was slowly poisoning them night after night. She had attributed Rusty's slowness on the weather, the morning, and even their food. Frank's voice shattered her train of thought. "Until the leak is remedied, you must leave this place immediately. Open all the windows." Evelyn gathered their coats, packed a few items, and scooped without arguing. Leia, still drowsy, embraced Rusty in her arms. He walked slowly but steadily outside, and the cold air hit her like a wave. The air was sharp and clean, full of life, and for the first time in weeks, Evelyn felt like she could breathe. They stayed with Evelyn's niece for a few days, in a cozy little house with mismatched quilts and the constant scent of cinnamon. Leia slept for nearly 12 hours that first night, and when she woke up, her eyes were clearer and her cheeks had returned to their natural color. Rusty, who had been hardly moved in days, stood on shaky legs and gently nudged her hand with his nose. It was as if someone had flipped a switch. The doctors confirmed Frank's suspicions. A low-level exposure. Leia perched on the mat, her lap cradled by Rusty's head. A barely audible "thank you" from her lips as she delicately stroked his ears. A soft, contented sigh from Rusty's lips as he drew nearer, pressed his body against hers, and remained silent. With her palm over her heart, Evelyn stood in the doorway. She didn't require miracles or answers. She had Rusty at school. Leia had always kept to herself. She wouldn't run, raise her hand, or join in on roughhousing during recess. It wasn't that she didn't want to, but something had grown quiet inside her after experiencing too much loss. But after meeting Rusty, everything changed. She began to draw pictures of him in the margins of her notebooks, and write little poems about his gentle ears, and how he would wait at the door when she returned home. Then, on the day she asked to bring him for show and tell, Rusty sat beside her, tall and steady, his calm presence grounding her like roots in the earth. The class heard her voice for the first time, clear and steady. "He doesn't speak, but he understands Eve." Leia agreed to tell Miss Alvarez her story when she asked. She recounted to the class the day she met Rusty, and how he patiently observed her without making any noise or jumping up and down. Even though she avoided him for a few days, he remained by her side the whole time. She began to confide in him in a way that no one else could hear. She recounted how Rusty had a sixth sense and saved her without a daring dive or yelling out a command, just by tugging, prodding, and never giving up on her. Because it was a real story, even though it was a sad one, the students listened intently. Instead of trying to elicit pity, Lila shared it so they would understand that love doesn't always conform to our expectations. It may arrive stealthily, on all fours, all furry and beetle-like. The news got out of hand, and the school went ahead and purchased CO detectors. Instead of reporting on a tragic event, a local news station highlighted an act of quiet courage. Just as on their first day back home, Rusty sat tall and composed next to Lila in every shot. A reporter, an instructor, and even other students were among those with whom Evelyn saw her granddaughter's interactions. She maintained a soft, yet commanding voice. "You gave him a home," she whispered softly, as she ran her fingers through Ila's hair one evening. and he gave you the world back." There was a delay in Lila's response. Looking down at Rusty curled up at her feet, she yelled out, "No, hey! Give me back my life!" That evening, the flat had a new vibe. The breeze was light, and the stillness wasn't so stifling. Rusty would always curl up next to Lila while she lay in bed. She leaned down and stroked her fingers through his fur, causing his warm breath to rise and fall in sync with hers. "Are you still here?" she asked in a low voice, breaking into a smile. No reason for Rusty to move, so he remained still. Simply being there conveyed everything. The moonlight streaming in through the window illuminated the space. She returned to a house that was filled with love and warmth, unlike the one she had experienced when grieving and lonely. Leia drew her eyes shut, and after everything she had lost, Rusty had become an equally powerful symbol of love's enduring presence in her life. It remains, it retains, and it rescues. True love can be silent at times, but loud and sure at other times. It can even have legs, a heart, and the quiet bravery to save you when you're about to fall.